In the last section, we refactored the car constructor into a class. There's two things I want to point out about this class's syntax here. First off, we add methods by using the same syntax as when we were working with the improved object literals. So we put the name of the method, our argument list, which in this case has no arguments, and then curly braces for the body of our method. The second thing I want to point out is that our constructor method is where we do any initialization or setup of our instance of car whenever we create one. So in this case, we passed in an options object, pulled off the title property, and assigned it to this.title. There's one other small thing I want to point out here. This is something that always trips me up. Whenever you're adding methods inside of the class, you don't need to separate the methods with a comma as you normally would with an object. So if we put the comma in, you'll see, yep, we get a big old error message down here on the bottom right. So no need to use any commas. All right, so let's continue on this example. We want to add in our Toyota class now. And remember, just the same as before, we want to extend or inherit all the setup and methods that exist on the car class. At the same time, I'm also gonna clean up our boilerplate down here. So I'm just gonna take out this block of code. So we have a good amount of space to put together our Toyota class. So we will define our Toyota class again by using the same syntax as we did with car. We'll write out the class keyword, the name of the class, and then our set of curly braces. Now in the class's body, we can add in our custom method. And for this case, I think we had honk. And whenever someone calls honk, we will return beep, like so. So now at the bottom, I'm going to create an instance of Toyota. So I'll say const Toyota is a new Toyota. And then we can call Toyota.honk. And yep, we get beep. I'm going to put in a little delimiter here as well, so we just see everything. Yep, okay, a little bit more clear. All right, so this looks good. Now we need to add in a little bit more behavior to Toyota. Remember, we want to get all the configuration and setup that occurs inside of car and all of its methods as well. In addition, we want to make sure that Toyota has its own constructor defined so that we can do some custom setup or initialization for Toyota as well. So in the last example, we said that a Toyota would have a color property. So let's start with that for our Toyota. Just the same as we did our initialization inside of the constructor method on car, we will do our initialization inside of the constructor method for Toyota. Remember, the constructor method here is the one and only method that will be called automatically whenever we create a new instance of Toyota. So we're going to assume that a Toyota will again be called with a color. And we'll assume, we'll have a color of red. And so again, constructor will be called with our options object, which has a color property. So I could put options in here because that's the options object. But because we only care about the color property, I might want to just say, you know what, just give me the color, just like so. So then we can assign this.color is coming from color. And now if we log out our Toyota, we can notice, yep, we now have got a color of red. Okay, so that was step one. We've now got some initialization for Toyota put together. So now the last step here, last thing we need to figure out is how do we get a Toyota to inherit or subclass or borrow, whatever term you want to use, all the methods coming from the car class. So to do this setup, we're going to use another little bit of fancy syntax around classes. Remember when we were doing this with ES5 a couple of videos ago, we had to use all that really nasty, kind of ugly looking stuff like prototype is car's prototype and the object create and all that kind of ugly stuff. So we're going to do all that kind of boilerplate with just two words. After class Toyota, we're going to add two words here. We're going to say extends car. And that's it. That's all there is. That's all we have to do to get our setup in here. So we've got class Toyota extends car. Now you will notice that over here on the right hand side, I do have an error message popping up. And so we do need to figure out what's going on with that. So we're going to kind of change gears just a bit and talk about the source of this error and talk about a little bit why, or a little bit more about what this extends mean right here, okay? When we use the extends keyword, we are saying I want Toyota to have access to all the methods and setup inside of car. And so now we would be able to call like, Toyota.drive if we so chose. The other thing to keep in mind is that whenever we create a new Toyota, we want to get all the setup and initialization that occurs inside of car as well. And so I'm specifically talking about car's constructor method. We want to run the car's constructor method to make sure that our title gets assigned to our instance of Toyota as well. So here's where things are going to get a little bit interesting. We're going to put the syntax on here for this, and then we'll talk about exactly what it means, okay? So I'm going to call inside the constructor super, like so. So we've got this super keyword. Let's take a look at a diagram. It's going to help us figure out what this super keyword is doing. So let me pull up the diagram here really quick. All right, so here we go. I've got my car class, which is this kind of long rectangle at the top, and I've got Toyota at the bottom. So Toyota is inheriting or extending car. So a Toyota is an instant or behaves like a car does. Both Toyota and car have a defined constructor method, but we want to make sure that we call the car's constructor method so that we get any initialization or setup code in there to run as well. Whenever we have a subclass like Toyota that wants to call a method on the parent, when that same method is declared on both sides, we refer to the super keyword. So super is just the same exact thing as saying, I want to call, basically, let me put a comment in here, car.constructor. You could kind of think of it as being the same exact thing. Like I just want to call the parent method on the parent class, or excuse me, the method on the parent class with the same exact name. So I want to call specifically car.constructor. As a good example, if a car also had a honk method and we wanted to call both instances of the honk method, I could call super in here as well. So then there's one last thing we need to do. You'll notice that this still hasn't solved our error message here. So whenever we call a super method, especially in the constructor, we need to make sure that we also pass along any options that were provided to this constructor. So right now we are just taking this, we're destructuring off the options object. And so whenever we are calling super in a constructor method, usually we will not use destructuring. And the reason for that is that we also want to get access to, like, say, a title property if one is provided. So I want to also have, a title of Toyota, maybe like, daily driver. So if I just called super right now, I'm not passing in an object that contains the title, right? So I'm trying to destructure off of undefined right now, which is what's throwing the error. So usually instead of destructuring in the constructor, we will just take in the entire object, we'll pass it along to super, and then we will also do any assignment that we have to do inside of our local constructor as well. And now you can see off on the right hand side, it looks like everything's working again. And I also have my color and title assigned, which means that we are doing the proper setup of both the car and the Toyota. And finally, on the Toyota, I should be able to call the drive method as well. And it looks like, yep, Vroom definitely exists there. Cool, so this looks pretty darn good. Let's continue in the next section. I want to talk a little bit more about classes, specifically when to use them. Okay, so let's continue with that in the next section.